My sister stole my identity and left me with $78,000 in debt. My parents defended her until one question in court changed everything. The envelope arrived from a bank I'd never heard of, its unfamiliar emblem a jarring detail that snagged my attention. That single piece of mail, almost tossed aside with countless junk offers, held the quiet prelude to a devastating truth, a truth that would expose a chasm in my family I never fully grasped. I almost recycled it, just another piece of unsolicited mail destined for the bin alongside credit card solicitations and insurance flyers that constantly flood my mailbox. None of it ever felt real, none of it belonged to me. Yet, an inexplicable instinct made me tear it open. Inside, a late payment notice glared back, a current balance of $18,400, a minimum payment due of $370, and an account 47 days past due. My name, my address, and an account number I had never laid eyes on were printed at the top. That Tuesday evening, at precisely 7:14 p.m., I stood in the kitchen of the apartment I'd worked countless double shifts to secure and dialed the number on the letter. The woman on the other end recited my social security number, my birth date, and my full legal name with the practiced, detached efficiency of someone who processes dozens of similar calls daily. She clearly wasn't prepared for the stunned silence that followed. "Is that correct?" she prompted. "Yes," I managed, "but I didn't open this account." A brief pause, then her voice, each word landing like a small, precise blow. "I see 2 additional cards linked to this SSN profile. Would you like me to pull those as well?" By the time that call ended, I was on the hook for $78,000 I hadn't spent. I sank onto the kitchen floor. It wasn't a conscious decision or a dramatic collapse. My legs simply gave out, the way a body sometimes yields when the magnitude of a moment becomes too vast to bear standing. At 7:41 p.m., I was still there, the phone in my lap, 3 new account numbers scrawled on the back of an envelope. After a long while, I began calling the fraud departments. The following afternoon, an email arrived from the fraud department of the second bank, containing copies of the original applications. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the handwriting on those forms. It was a script I'd known my entire life. My younger sister, Bethany, had been quietly building a comfortable life using my identity, all while I relentlessly worked extra shifts, determined to keep my own credit impeccable. To truly understand what unfolded, you need to understand Bethany. I've spent 29 years trying to fathom her, and while I haven't achieved perfect understanding, I have found a certain clarity, which, in its own way, is far more valuable. My name is Sarah Davies. I'm 31 years old and work as a paralegal at a mid-sized civil litigation firm in Columbus, Ohio. This career path wasn't handed to me. It's the result of a community college degree, 4 years of night classes while holding down day jobs, and the kind of unyielding persistence that develops in people who've learned that nothing will be given to them, and who have stopped waiting for it. I grew up in a home where that lesson was applied inconsistently. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor Davies, can best be described by saying they have always loved Bethany more, and they have never, ever acknowledged it. The chasm between those 2 facts has been the prevailing weather system of my entire childhood. My father is a retired postal worker. My mother manages a dry cleaning business that my grandmother started in 1979. They aren't wealthy, but they are comfortable, and they used those comfortable years to demonstrate, in countless small daily increments, that comfort was distributed unevenly in our family. Bethany is 28, the younger daughter. She received a specific brand of parental attention that manifests as unlimited tolerance. It's the kind that excuses every setback with, "she's going through a hard time," a phrase that, in Bethany's case, has been continuously applicable since roughly 2009. She dropped out of 2 colleges and has, by my count, held 11 jobs in 7 years. She borrows money from our parents and never repays it, and this is never discussed. In my honest assessment, she isn't unintelligent. She's simply a person who has never had to be truly accountable for anything, and therefore, she's never developed the particular resilience that accountability builds. She has arrived at 28 with a sophisticated understanding of how to portray herself as a victim of circumstances, even though she is, in fact, the primary architect of those circumstances. I say this not to be cruel, but because it's the truth, and the story I'm about to share makes no sense if you merely see Bethany as someone who made poor choices. She made strategic ones. My credit score was 791 when that letter arrived. I want you to grasp what that number represents, not as a boast, but as vital context. It signifies 9 years of scrupulously paying every bill on time, of never buying what I couldn't afford, of putting a new laptop back on the shelf because it wasn't the right time and making my old one last 2 more years. It represents carefully building something, in the distinct way people build when they have no safety net and understand that the construction itself is the safety net. Bethany knew my credit score. She had asked about it once over the phone, in that casual tone of someone gathering information they want to appear not to be gathering. I told her, because she was my sister, and I didn't yet comprehend why she was collecting such data. The fraud department documents arrived in a priority mail envelope on a Thursday. I sat at my kitchen table, the envelope before me, for about 4 minutes. That was the time it took me to understand I was afraid of what was inside and to decide that fear of the truth was a luxury I couldn't afford. There were 3 credit card applications, each printed on the bank's standard form, each bearing my name, my social security number, my date of birth, my current address, and an old address, one I'd lived at 2 apartments ago, which I'd given Bethany once so she could mail me something, and which I hadn't thought about since. The handwriting was unmistakable. Bethany has always written her 7s with a European cross, a habit she picked up from a boyfriend who spent a year in France and maintained. "We'll move quickly then," she stated. "Is there any documentation of the handwriting being your sister's beyond your personal identification of it?" I had anticipated this. From an old box in my closet, I retrieved 3 birthday cards from Bethany, spanning the last 8 years. Each was in her distinctive hand, each containing 7s with that European cross. I slid them across the desk. Detective Ramirez looked at them, then back at the applications. "I'm going to get our document examiner to take a look," she said. "But honestly, from here, that's not a close call." The document examiner, Specialist Ben Carter, with 12 years in the Forensic Documents Division, produced a written comparison analysis 6 days later. It concluded, with professional certainty, that the handwriting on the 3 credit applications matched that on the birthday cards. I read the report at my desk at the firm, then sat very still for a while. My supervising attorney, Brenda Sterling, with 22 years in civil litigation, a woman who has witnessed the full spectrum of human behavior and approaches it with the clear-eyed pragmatism of someone who traffics in evidence, had been aware of my situation since I first found that initial letter. She had offered the firm's resources where appropriate and had advised me early on, in that quiet way she has when imparting something important without being melodramatic, "Sarah, document everything. Every conversation, every communication from your family, every date and time. Start now." I had started then. I kept a running document, date-stamped and backed up in 2 locations. It contained notes from every conversation with my parents, every text message, every voicemail. My mother's text, 3 days after our confrontation: "Sarah, please think about what you're doing to this family." My father's voicemail: "You know what this is going to do to Bethany? Is that what you want?" Not a single message asking how I was. Not one message about the $78,000 debt. I added them all to the document. Detective Ramirez called me on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after I filed the report. "We have enough," she said. "We'll be making the arrest tomorrow." Bethany was arrested on a Thursday morning. I know this because my mother called me at 9:47 a.m. Not to ask how I was, not to say she finally understood, but to say, in a voice more frightened than sad, "They took her, Sarah. They took her in handcuffs. How could you do this?" I didn't answer the question, because it wasn't a real question. "I'll see you at the arraignment," I said. I went to the arraignment alone. I want to convey what that felt like, walking into a courtroom by yourself to face your sister in a criminal proceeding, with your folder of documents, your 2 copies of the examiner's report, and the stark knowledge that you've done the right thing, and that doing the right thing has cost you your family, and perhaps hasn't finished costing you yet. I want you to understand what it means to sit on the right side of a courtroom aisle, looking at the empty seat beside you where the people who should be there are not, because they have chosen to be on the other side of this. I was composed. I had prepared to be composed. I had sat with Brenda Sterling the previous afternoon, and she had explained what to expect, what not to do, the likely strategy of the prosecutor, and what to watch for from the defense. She had also said, with the quiet directness of someone who has observed enough courtroom proceedings to know what truly matters, whatever happens in there, do not react. Not to Bethany, not to whatever her attorney says, not to anything your family does if they show up. Then a pause. And Sarah, prepare yourself. They may show up. I had prepared myself. But not fully. The doors opened behind me at 10:08 a.m. My parents walked in, dressed as if for church. My mother in the navy dress she reserves for important occasions. My father in the blazer he bought for my college graduation, which he attended but mentioned only once, a stark contrast to Bethany's high school graduation, which he references at least twice a year. They walked past me. They sat on Bethany's side. They did not look at me. My father stared straight ahead, with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is committed to it. My mother, and this is the detail I keep replaying, the one that reveals something crucial, my mother looked at me as she passed. Not with guilt, but with the expression of a woman who has assessed the situation and decided on a strategy. They hadn't warned me. They hadn't even hesitated. Bethany's attorney, Mr. Martin Thorne, a private defense attorney, presented himself as polished and confident. It was the specific confidence of someone who has handled cases like this before and has a ready script. He would claim, he said in his opening statement, that this was a family matter, that Sarah had permitted Bethany to use her information before a sudden change of heart, rooted in personal conflict, caused her to reframe the situation as fraud. I kept my face impassive. Then, my father raised his hand. I want to convey the raw experience of watching your own father raise his hand in a courtroom to testify against you, because it demands that specificity. He raised it like a student in school, formal, deliberate, the gesture of someone convinced of its appropriateness and wanting the room to bear witness to his conviction. The judge, the Honorable Eleanor Vance, 21 years on the bench, a woman whose expression suggested she had seen most things and remained unimpressed by them, looked at him with the measured assessment of someone deciding whether to allow it. She allowed it. My father stood. He stood in that courtroom and declared, Your Honor, Sarah has always been jealous of her sister. Bethany made poor choices, but Sarah is vindictive. This is about Sarah wanting to destroy our family. My mother nodded, crying softly, the specific soft crying of a performance calibrated for an audience. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney David Chen, 11 years in the DA's office, a man I had met twice before and who had given me the same advice as Brenda about not reacting, sat perfectly still. I sat perfectly still. Then, Judge Vance looked at my parents. Not with anger, but with the specific, focused attention of a judge who has just heard a statement that has raised a question she intends to ask. Before we proceed, she said, I have a question for the parents. The courtroom went quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a legal proceeding, but that distinct quality of silence that a room produces when it senses something significant is about to unfold. Judge Vance looked directly at my father, then at my mother. Did either of you know that Bethany was using Sarah's identity? She asked, before the police report was filed. The question landed in the room like a clear, precise stone, carefully constructed to be unanswerable without revealing something. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother's face shifted. The crying stopped. What replaced it was not composure, but the expression of someone who has just realized that the performance they've been executing is about to yield a consequence they hadn't anticipated. The silence stretched. "I asked a very clear question," Judge Vance stated, her voice perfectly level. "And I'll note that both of you have come before this court voluntarily and made statements on the record, which means you are subject to the same standards of honesty that govern all court proceedings." My mother pressed her hand over her mouth. Not the gesture of someone overcome with emotion, but of someone trying to prevent themselves from speaking. Mr. Thorne, Bethany's attorney, had gone completely still. Bethany had turned in her seat and was looking at her parents with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not the practiced vulnerability or the deployed charm, but something genuine, frightened, and betrayed. It was the expression of someone who has just watched the people they were counting on accidentally drop them. My father looked at the judge. He looked at my mother. He looked at the floor. "We knew she had opened a card or two," he murmured. The words were quiet, almost casual, in the tone of a man who still believed minimization was a viable strategy. "A card or two," Judge Vance repeated, not as a question, but as a deliberate echo, the specific judicial repetition of words that would need to be scrutinized more carefully than the speaker intended. Prosecutor Chin stood. "Your Honor," he said, "given this admission, the prosecution requests the court consider whether the parents of the defendant may have had foreknowledge of, and involvement in, concealing the fraud. We also ask that today's testimony be preserved for potential use in any related proceedings." My father began to say something, the start of an objection, the instinct of a man accustomed to being the loudest voice in any room, who had not yet fully grasped that this room operated by a different order. Judge Vance looked at him. He stopped. Mr. Thorne was no longer looking confident. He was looking at his client with the expression of an attorney who has just watched his case pivot in an entirely unforeseen direction. Bethany was still turned in her seat, still looking at her parents. The expression on her face, and I tell you this because it is true, and truth is at the heart of this story, was not one of anger or accusation. It was something smaller, something that settled beneath everything else, like the expression of someone who has spent their entire life relying on a structure that has just publicly failed them, who is perhaps, for the very first time, sitting with the particular weight of that realization. I did not feel satisfaction at that expression. I will be honest about that too. I did not feel satisfied. What I felt was tired. The specific exhaustion of someone who has spent years calculating the math of a relationship and has finally arrived at a number, only to find it was exactly what they had feared it would be. The proceeding concluded. The judge set a follow-up date. The prosecutor's office indicated they would be investigating my parents' disclosure for potential obstruction and concealment charges. Mr. Thorne gathered his papers with the focused efficiency of a man who knew he needed to have a serious conversation with his client and was mentally preparing for it. Outside the courtroom, in the corridor where the gray linoleum and fluorescent lights cast everything in the quality of a distant memory, my mother grabbed my arm. Her hand was cold. Her face was no longer performing. The act had ceased back in the courtroom, and what remained was her true self, smaller, more frightened. "Sarah," she pleaded, her voice low and urgent. "Please. You don't understand what this will do to us." I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I pulled free. Not with force, but simply by disengaging, the way you pull away from something that holds you when you've decided it no longer has the right. "No, Mom," I said. "You don't understand what you already did to me." I did not yell. I had prepared not to yell, and that preparation held. But more than preparation, I simply had no yelling left in me at that moment. What I possessed was the specific clarity of someone who has endured an experience that has burned away everything except what is unequivocally true. I did not explain that $78,000 in stolen debt was not a simple misunderstanding. I did not explain what it had cost me in credit, in sleep, and in that specific quality of safety you meticulously build over years, which can be annihilated in 16 months by someone using your name. I did not beg them to choose me, or explain why they should have, or ask them to comprehend what they had done. I had spent a lifetime explaining things to people who had already decided not to understand. The evidence had spoken for itself. 6 months later, Bethany accepted a plea agreement. The terms included restitution, a repayment schedule structured over 7 years that, in my assessment, would likely never be fully paid, but which exists on paper and provides me with legal recourse should she default. The plea also included 3 years of probation and mandatory financial counseling, the irony of which I simply note without further comment. My parents were not charged. The prosecutor's investigation concluded that while their foreknowledge was clear, the specific legal threshold for concealment charges was not met. I received this news from Prosecutor Chen by phone on a Tuesday afternoon and sat with it for a while. Justice, I've learned from 9 years in litigation, isn't a destination. It's a process with a settlement range. My credit score is being rebuilt. This is the accurate term for it. Rebuilt with the specific, patient effort of someone who has done it before and understands it takes years, requiring unwavering diligence month after month. I'm at 683 as of last month. I know where I'm headed. I know how long it will take. I have done this before. Brenda Sterling gave me more responsibility at the firm, not as an act of sympathy, but as an assessment of demonstrated judgment. She had watched me navigate something profoundly complex, maintain composure throughout, meticulously document everything, and make decisions that were difficult yet correct. She told me, in that brief, impactful way she has, "You handled that well." I have not spoken to my parents since the arraignment. My mother has called twice, my father once. I have listened to their voicemails and not returned their calls, because nothing in those messages warrants a response. They are not apologies. They are requests for a return to a family arrangement that demands I absorb the consequences of other people's choices, all while being grateful for the opportunity. I am done with that arrangement. I have a therapist now, Dr. Lena Hansen, a licensed psychologist with 12 years in practice, specializing in family estrangement and financial trauma. She possesses the particular quality of someone who listens to the entire story before offering any insight, and who shares truths that are useful rather than merely comfortable. At our last session, she asked me what I had learned from it all. I paused for a moment. The truth doesn't require an audience, I said. It just requires documentation. She wrote something down. The credit card debts are being discharged through the fraud resolution process. The banks, once presented with the detective's report and the handwriting analysis, cooperated more fully than I expected. They cooperated like institutions that understand their liability when fraud is clearly documented and the victim has the evidence to prove it. My apartment is secure. My job is secure. My credit is recovering. My family is what it is.